The American Civil War was an extremely dark time in American history. Brother against brother and father against son was the basis of the Civil War. This bloody war, however, were led by calculating generals from the Union and Confederate States of America. Here are their stories.
General Ulysses Grant was an irreplaceable asset to the Union Army. Grant was born on April 27, 1822 in Point Pleasant, Ohio to Hannah and Jesse Grant. Before the Civil War, Grant attended the U.S. Military Academy in West Point, New York. In 1848, Grant married Julia Boggs Dent, and together they had 4 children: Frederick Dent Grant, Ulysses Grant Jr., Ellen Renshaw Grant, and Jesse Root Grant. Grant also served in the Mexican-American War as a quartermaster. Because of his great promise and service on the battlefield, he was later assigned to other posts in cities such as Sackett's Harbor, New York, Detroit, Michigan, and Humboldt Bay, California, and received many honors such as first and second brevet lieutenant and later brevet captain. Throughout his pre-Civil War military service, he rose through ranks such as colonel, lieutenant, captain, and general. He later resigned from military duties due to his drinking habits. After leaving the army, he resigned to working civilian jobs such as farming and eventually managing his father's leather shop. He later reapplied to join the army and became a commander for the Union Army at Cairo. Grant was able to obtain Fort Henry, the Tennessee River, and Fort Donelson during the inspection of Cairo and its series of battles. He gained the nickname Unconditional Surrender, as well as the attention of President Abraham Lincoln himself. In 1864, Lincoln gave the command of the Union armies, along with the honor to lead the Army of the Potomac, made famous by George Washington, to Grant. And with his superior plans and strategies, their larger amount of resources, and his quick decision-making, Grant was able to achieve victory for the Union. Following the events after the war, Grant was nominated as president. He won and served from 1869 to 1877. After finishing his terms, the Grants go on a tour of the world, making stops in places such as Europe and Asia. From there, a series of unfortunate events followed Grant. Firstly, he injured his hip, forever immobilizing him. From there, his brokerage firm fails on Wall Street, spiraling the Grants into bankruptcy. Not only did his firm fall apart, but his health too. Grant was diagnosed with throat cancer and was to live out his remaining days in his bed and only intaking liquid foods due to the excruciating pain. There was goodness in his tragic days, fortunately. Grant began writing his 2-volume memoir that provides descriptive insight into the Civil War and other major points of his life. His memoir later became one of the most highly acclaimed books written by a president and is still cherished by historians and others alike. General Ulysses Grant eventually passed away on June 23, 1885, in Mount McGregor, Saratoga Springs, New York, leaving behind a colorful legacy that will forever linger in the American Civil War's history.
Now we have General George V McCullen, son of Dr. George McCullen and Elizabeth Steinman Sprinton. He was born on December 3, 1826 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He also attended the West Point Military Academy. In school, McCullen was always at the top of his classes, so it's no surprise that he was later selected to lead the Union Army by Union President Abraham Lincoln. Before the Civil War, McCullen was an observer for other wars and battles, such as the Crimean War. He also designed the McCullen saddle, a widely used horse saddle during the 20th century. In 1860, he married Ellen Mary Marcy. In April of the following year after his marriage, McCullen was called to serve as a general for the Ohio Volunteers in the Civil War. Because of his excellent schooling record, he was later chosen by President Lincoln to be the general of the entire regular army of the Union, including the famous Army of the Potomac. Although in theory, McCullen was supposed to be a fantastic general, he lacked decisiveness. This led to him losing many battles for the Union, and he was removed from the army promptly. After being removed, McCullen became the chief engineer of the New York City Department of Docks. He also served as the governor of New Jersey from 1878 to 1881. During his final years, he focused on traveling and writing his memoir, before he passed away on October 29, 1885 in Orange, New Jersey. Although George B. McCullen wasn't the greatest general of the Civil War, he sure did make some important developments that did help shape our America.
Moving on to our Confederate generals, we have General Robert E. Lee. Lee can be seen as one of the best Southern generals because of his incredible leadership. He was born on January 19, 1807 to Henry Lee III and Anne Hill Carter Lee in Stratford Hall, Virginia. Lee attended West Point as well, and he managed to graduate without a single demerit. Shortly after college, Lee married George Washington's great-granddaughter, Mary Curtis. Together, Robert and Mary had 7 children. George Washington Curtis Lee, William Henry Fitzhugh, Mildred Child Lee, Anne Carter Lee, and Mary Curtis Lee. In his pre-Civil War life, Lee was an engineer for the U.S. Army and the owner of a not-so-successful plantation. As mentioned previously, Lee excelled in college and as a result was called upon by Abraham Lincoln to become a general for the Union Army. Lee had always been against slavery, so it had been a great shock when he turned down President Lincoln to fight with the Confederate Army because he believed that he should remain loyal to his home state, Virginia. General Lee put up an extremely strong fight, and many believed that he would lead the Confederate Army to victory, but he ultimately surrendered to the Union in the end. Upon returning from war, Lee decided to move his family from the city of Richmond to the rural areas of Derwent. Originally, Lee wanted to settle down and become a farmer, but instead he was offered the position to become the president of Washington College, and he devoted his life to that college. Around this time, Lee began to develop some heart problems, and in September of 1870, Lee suffered from a stroke and later died on October 12, 1870 in Lexington, Virginia. Lee was a wonderful general to the Confederate forces and guided them throughout the war to fight against the many soldiers of the Union. Although he surrendered to the Union, his service in the Army made him a historical figure in American Civil War history.
Considered one of the greatest Southern War heroes of the Civil War, General Thomas Jackson, nicknamed Stonewall, made a lasting impression on American history. Thomas Jackson was born January 21, 1824, in Clarksburg, Virginia, to parents Jonathan and Julia Neal Jackson. The Jackson family would be short-lived, because Jackson's father and older sister died of typhoid, leaving behind Jackson, 3 other children, and a widow. Jackson's mother remarried to Blake Woodson. From there, Jackson was sent away to live with relatives, where he was again sent off to the U.S. Military Academy in West Point. He graduated with difficulty due to his age being relatively older than the other cadets, and his lack of education. However, Jackson would prove himself on the battlefield, where he excelled in artillery work during the Mexican-American War. After his service in the Mexican War, he taught artillery tactics and natural philosophy at the Virginia Military Institute. Before he left for war, he married Eleanor Junkin, who died during childbirth, sadly giving birth to a male stillborn baby. Jackson remarries Mary Anna Morrison, who gives birth to Julia Lauren Jackson. Jackson will never be able to meet his child. During the Civil War, specifically the Battle of Chancellorsville, Jackson was the victim of friendly fire and died in Guinea, Virginia on May 10, 1863. Although Jackson's life ended quickly on the battlefield, his skill preserved his legacy and will forever be remembered as an excellent commander and soldier.